Don't call the Pentagon, unless you're absolutely certain who's standing in front of you. The words floated across the quiet highway rest stop with such calm certainty that several people instinctively stopped what they were doing. A truck driver lowered his coffee. A young mother paused while helping her son zip his jacket. Even the afternoon breeze seemed to hesitate as Officer Ryan Callahan narrowed his eyes toward the tall black man standing beside a dark green SUV with its hood raised. Ryan let out a short laugh that carried more disbelief than amusement. "That's supposed to scare me?" he asked, adjusting the body camera clipped neatly to his uniform. "I've heard every excuse in the book." The older man didn't answer immediately. He simply rested one weathered hand on the warm metal of the SUV and looked toward the fading orange sky stretching over Interstate 95. His silver hair caught the late afternoon sunlight, and although he wore nothing more than a navy windbreaker, faded blue jeans, and worn leather boots, there was something about the way he stood that quietly resisted the chaos surrounding him. His shoulders were relaxed. His breathing never changed. His eyes never searched for sympathy from the growing crowd. Ryan stepped closer. "License and registration." The man handed them over without hesitation. Ryan glanced down, then back up again. "Marcus Ellison." He spoke the name slowly, almost testing it. "Where are you headed?" "Washington." "Purpose?" "Official business." Ryan smirked. "Official with who?" Marcus answered without pride or irritation. "The United States Army." A few people exchanged uncertain glances, but Ryan's expression hardened instead of softening. He looked Marcus up and down once more, lingering on the dusty boots, the aging SUV, and the small overnight bag resting in the passenger seat. None of it matched the picture he had already built in his mind. "Army, huh?" Ryan said. "You expecting me to believe you're some kind of officer?" Marcus remained silent for a heartbeat before replying. "I don't need you to believe anything." That quiet confidence unsettled Ryan far more than anger would have. He walked around the vehicle, studying every inch as though the faded paint itself were suspicious. The parking lot had grown strangely quiet. Conversations dissolved into whispers. A teenager lowered his phone after realizing this wasn't becoming the entertaining roadside scene he had expected. Marcus never shifted his weight, never raised his voice, never tried to impress anyone watching. He simply waited. Ryan returned holding the driver's license between two fingers. "General Marcus Ellison," he read aloud with unmistakable sarcasm. "That's quite a title you've got printed here." Marcus met his eyes with the same composed expression. "It isn't printed for recognition. It's there because it's true." Ryan shook his head and smiled as if he had just uncovered the easiest lie of his career. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to stay exactly where you are while I verify every word you've told me." Marcus gave one slow nod. "Take all the time you need, officer." Ryan reached for his radio, still convinced he controlled every second unfolding before him. Marcus quietly slipped his phone back into his jacket pocket without unlocking it. He had not argued. He had not protested. He had not reminded anyone of his rank. Yet somewhere beneath the distant rumble of 18-wheelers and the soft rustle of pine trees lining the interstate, it felt as though time itself had begun counting down towards something no one standing in that parking lot could possibly imagine. Officer Ryan Callahan walked a slow circle around the aging sport utility vehicle, his boots crunching across loose gravel scattered along the edge of the parking lot. The engine had already cooled enough that the faint scent of warm metal drifted into the crisp Virginia air. He glanced through every window, studying neatly folded road maps, a small cooler, a weathered Bible resting beside the center console, and a framed photograph lying face down on the passenger seat. Nothing looked unusual, yet something about the driver's calm refusal to become defensive continued to irritate him. Marcus Ellison stood exactly where he had been told, his hands relaxed at his sides, his eyes following a pair of bald eagles gliding high above the pine trees instead of the officer questioning him. It was not the posture of a man trying to escape trouble. It was the posture of someone who had spent an entire lifetime learning that patience often spoke louder than pride. Few people standing nearby could have guessed where Marcus had been only 24 hours earlier. He had spent the previous afternoon at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, visiting wounded service members, quietly shaking hands, listening to families, and thanking young soldiers who insisted that he deserved their respect far more than they deserved his. Before sunrise that morning, He had driven south to attend a private ceremony honoring several retired veterans whose names rarely appeared in newspapers, but whose sacrifices had shaped generations of American service members. Marcus preferred traveling alone whenever possible. He disliked flashing official credentials or requesting military escorts. Years in uniform had taught him that true leadership was measured long after applause faded. The faded sport utility vehicle reflected that same philosophy. It had more than 200,000 miles on the odometer, a small scratch along the rear bumper, and enough memories inside to fill a lifetime. Ryan saw an old vehicle. Marcus saw the same truck that had carried him home after deployments, transported his children to Little League games, and driven his late wife to church every Sunday, until illness slowly stole those peaceful routines away. The crowd watching from a respectful distance knew none of that. They only saw an older black man waiting quietly beside an officer who appeared increasingly determined to prove something. A little boy tugged gently on his father's sleeve and whispered, "Dad, why is that man so calm?" His father looked toward Marcus before answering softly, "Maybe because he knows who he is." Marcus heard the words carried by the breeze, but never acknowledged them. His attention shifted briefly toward the American flag fluttering above the nearby travel plaza. The fabric snapped rhythmically against the pole as sunlight reflected from its bright red stripes. He had saluted that flag in deserts, mountains, frozen airfields, and crowded military cemeteries. Today, wearing ordinary clothes, he simply looked at it with quiet gratitude. Officer Callahan returned holding the driver's license once again, still convinced the story in front of him did not fit the picture inside his mind. Behind the confidence in Marcus's steady eyes, however, rested decades of discipline, sacrifice, and responsibility that no civilian jacket could conceal, even if no one standing there had recognized it yet. Ryan Callahan stared at the driver's license for another long moment before slipping it into his shirt pocket instead of handing it back. The movement was small, deliberate, and impossible to mistake. Marcus noticed it, but said nothing. Around them, the afternoon traffic continued flowing along Interstate 95, yet inside the rest area, time seemed to slow beneath the amber light washing across the concrete. Ryan pressed the button on his shoulder radio. "Dispatch, I need a complete verification on an individual claiming military status." His tone carried quiet confidence, the kind that came from believing the answer would confirm everything he already suspected. While waiting for a response, he turned back toward Marcus with folded arms. "You said you were traveling on official business. Funny thing is, official people usually do not travel alone in a 20-year-old vehicle." Marcus answered with the same measured voice that had never risen above conversation level. "Sometimes the mission matters more than appearances." Ryan smiled without warmth. "That sounds rehearsed." Marcus looked toward the distant flag once more before replying. "No, officer. It sounds experienced." The words were calm, but they unsettled Ryan far more than an argument would have. During his 9 years in law enforcement, he had learned to read nervous hands, wandering eyes, rushed explanations, and changing stories. Marcus displayed none of them. That certainty irritated him because it refused to fit the assumptions already taking shape inside his mind. A second patrol cruiser rolled quietly into the parking lot. Officer Daniel Brooks stepped out, carrying a tablet beneath one arm. He glanced from Ryan to Marcus, sensing the unusual silence before speaking. "Everything all right?" Ryan nodded. "Just verifying a story that does not add up." Daniel looked politely toward Marcus. "Sir, has the officer explained why he needed to stop you?" "He has been doing his job," Marcus answered. "And I have been answering his questions." Daniel noticed the absence of frustration in Marcus's voice and briefly frowned. He had expected irritation after several minutes beside the roadside. Instead, he found unusual composure. Ryan lowered his voice so only Daniel could hear. "He claims he is a United States Army general." Daniel looked back toward Marcus. The older man's posture remained perfectly straight, almost instinctively balanced, as though decades of discipline had become part of his breathing. Daniel quietly asked, "Did dispatch verify his identification yet?" Ryan shook his head. "Not yet, but I already know something is off." Nearby, the little boy who had spoken to his father continued watching Marcus with open curiosity. The child noticed details adults often ignored. The polished black watch that looked older than he was. the careful way Marcus folded his hands instead of crossing his arms. The small lapel pin shaped like an American flag attached neatly inside his windbreaker. None of it seemed loud. Everything seemed earned. The dispatch radio finally crackled to life, but before anyone could fully hear the message, heavy static swallowed the transmission. Ryan exhaled impatiently and reached for the microphone again. "Repeat that, dispatch. Your signal broke up." The reply dissolved once more beneath interference. Marcus quietly slipped one hand into his jacket, not reaching for identification or documents, but gently touching the cell phone resting inside the pocket. He checked neither the screen nor the time. He simply rested his hand there for a brief second before letting it fall naturally to his side again. Daniel noticed the movement and wondered why a man who appeared completely unafraid seemed so certain that the next few minutes would change everything. Ryan Callahan lowered the radio slowly after the second burst of static faded into silence. His jaw tightened. He disliked uncertainty, and the broken transmission only strengthened his belief that the man standing before him was buying time. He looked directly at Marcus Ellison and spoke with a firmness that invited no discussion. "Until I receive confirmation, I am treating this as an active investigation." Marcus inclined his head once. "I understand." The answer arrived without resentment, without sarcasm, and without even the slightest trace of fear. Ryan gestured toward the front of the sport utility vehicle. "Step away from your vehicle, please." Marcus complied immediately, moving with deliberate, unhurried steps before stopping several feet from the bumper. Every motion reflected decades of discipline rather than reluctance. Daniel Brooks watched carefully. Most people placed in an unexpected encounter either talked too much or protested every instruction. Marcus did neither. He simply listened, acknowledged each request, and followed it with quiet precision. Ryan opened the driver's door and looked inside once more. The cabin was remarkably orderly. A neatly pressed suit hung inside a garment bag. A polished pair of dress shoes rested beneath it. On the back seat sat a slim leather portfolio embossed with a small gold eagle. Ryan unzipped it halfway, expecting to uncover something suspicious. Instead, he found handwritten notes, printed schedules, and several sealed envelopes bearing official government markings. He frowned. The documents appeared genuine, yet he refused to let that possibility reshape the conclusion he had already reached. "Anyone can buy a portfolio," he muttered under his breath before closing it again. Marcus remained where he had been instructed, watching neither Ryan nor the growing audience gathering near the fuel pumps. A cool breeze carried the scent of fresh rain from somewhere beyond the tree line, gently stirring the edges of his windbreaker. The American flag above the travel plaza snapped sharply against its pole. Marcus looked at it for only a moment before lowering his eyes again. Daniel quietly stepped closer to Ryan. "Everything inside looks normal," he whispered. Ryan answered without taking his eyes off the vehicle. "Sometimes normal is exactly what people want you to see." Daniel hesitated. "Maybe, but nothing here matches someone trying to hide something." Ryan ignored the observation. Instead, he walked back toward Marcus and held out one hand. "I need your phone." Marcus looked at him calmly. "May I ask why?" "Because I am asking for it." There was a brief silence. The truck engines passing on the interstate rumbled like distant thunder beyond the rows of pine trees. Marcus slowly removed the phone from his jacket and placed it into Ryan's waiting hand without resistance. Ryan glanced at the dark screen. "Locked." "Yes." "Open it." Marcus met his eyes steadily. "Officer, before we go any further, I have one request." Ryan folded his arms. "What request?" Marcus's voice remained quiet enough that everyone nearby instinctively leaned forward to hear. "Allow me to make one phone call. After that, I will fully cooperate with anything that is legally required." Ryan let out a short laugh, convinced he already knew how the conversation would end. "One phone call is not going to change what is happening here." Marcus answered with the same measured certainty that had never left him since the encounter began. "No, officer. It will simply make sure the right people know where I am." Daniel felt an unexpected chill despite the warm evening air, while Ryan, certain he was still completely in control, looked down at the phone in his hand for one long silent moment before making his decision. Ryan Callahan studied Marcus Ellison for another long moment before extending the phone back toward him. The faint smile on his face suggested complete confidence that whatever happened next would only confirm his own judgment. You have exactly one call, he said. Make it count. Marcus accepted the phone with a quiet nod of appreciation. Thank you, officer. There was no triumph in his voice, only courtesy. He unlocked the device without hesitation and scrolled past dozens of names before stopping on one contact that displayed neither a rank nor a title, only a single secure number. Daniel Brooks noticed the unusual choice immediately. Most people in stressful situations called family, attorneys, or close friends. Marcus called none of them. He pressed the phone to his ear and waited. The line connected almost instantly. Marcus spoke only a few words, each one measured and unmistakably calm. This is Marcus Ellison. Authentication Sierra 741. I have experienced an unexpected delay while traveling to Washington. My current location is Interstate 95, mile marker 183, northbound Travel Plaza. I will remain exactly where I am until further instructions. He stopped speaking and listened. Ryan folded his arms with obvious amusement. That is it. Marcus simply answered, Yes, sir. His tone toward the unseen voice carried quiet respect rather than urgency. After several seconds, he replied once more. Understood. I appreciate the acknowledgement. The call ended. No explanation. No argument. No request for rescue. Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket and resumed waiting exactly where he had been standing before. Ryan shook his head. You really expect me to believe that mysterious conversation changes anything? Marcus looked at him with the same steady expression that had never wavered since the encounter began. I do not expect you to believe anything, officer. I only expect that someone will verify the facts. The words lingered in the warm evening air. Daniel glanced toward the highway where long lines of tractor-trailers rolled steadily north beneath the fading sunlight. Everything appeared ordinary, yet an unfamiliar tension settled over the parking lot. Even the small crowd had stopped whispering. The little boy who had been watching from beside the fuel pumps asked his father, Why did he sound so calm? His father answered quietly, Because some people know panic never solves a problem. 2 minutes passed. Then 3. Ryan checked his watch with growing impatience. Nothing happened. No sirens. No flashing lights. No phone calls. He looked toward Marcus with renewed confidence. Looks like your friends are busy. Marcus answered without irritation. Perhaps they are making certain they understand the situation before responding. Daniel noticed something Ryan had overlooked. Marcus had never once asked to leave. He had never demanded respect. He had never even mentioned his rank after the first conversation. He simply stood beneath the evening sky, shoulders relaxed, as the American flag continued to wave above the Travel Plaza. Then Ryan's patrol radio crackled sharply. This time there was no static. Dispatch spoke with unusual urgency. Unit 12, confirm your location immediately. Repeat, confirm your exact location and maintain your current position. Additional communications are being routed through command. Ryan frowned. Dispatch, what is this regarding? There was a brief pause before the reply came back, slower than before. Stand by, Unit 12. You are about to receive a priority call from state headquarters. Do not clear the scene until instructed. Ryan's confident smile faded for the first time that afternoon as Daniel quietly turned toward Marcus, who remained perfectly still, his eyes resting on the horizon as though he had expected those exact words all along. The parking lot fell into a silence so complete that even the distant rumble of passing trucks seemed softened by the warm evening air. Ryan Callahan lowered the radio from his shoulder, but did not immediately respond. His eyes remained fixed on the speaker clipped to his uniform, as though he expected the dispatcher to take the words back. Instead, nothing came except the steady hiss of an open channel. A breeze drifted across the Travel Plaza, carrying the scent of pine needles and fresh asphalt after a light afternoon shower several miles away. The American flag above the building continued its slow, rhythmic movement, illuminated by the golden light of the setting sun. Marcus Ellison stood exactly where he had been for the past several minutes, neither impatient nor triumphant. His breathing remained slow and even. His gaze rested somewhere beyond the highway, following the horizon rather than the people watching him. Daniel Brooks quietly observed the older man with growing respect. It was no longer simply the calm that impressed him. It was the complete absence of bitterness. Marcus had been questioned, doubted, and treated with suspicion, yet there was no anger in his posture, no desire to embarrass anyone, and no satisfaction as the situation slowly began to change. Daniel had spent years meeting people during the worst moments of their lives. Fear usually made voices louder. Pride usually made arguments longer. Marcus displayed neither. Instead, he seemed almost concerned that everyone remained patient until the truth arrived on its own. Nearby, the little boy reached into his father's hand and asked in a whisper, "Is that man a soldier?" His father looked carefully at Marcus before answering. "I think he is more than that." The boy nodded thoughtfully without taking his eyes off him. Ryan finally looked up from the radio. For the first time since the encounter began, uncertainty replaced confidence. He replayed every answer Marcus had given. Every instruction had been followed. Every question had received a direct response. Not once had the older man attempted to leave or challenge his authority. The silence surrounding Marcus no longer felt empty. It felt disciplined, as though every quiet second carried the weight of decades spent making difficult decisions without raising his voice. The wind gently lifted the edge of Marcus's navy jacket, revealing the corner of a folded ceremony program tucked neatly inside one pocket. Gold lettering shimmered briefly in the sunlight before disappearing again beneath the fabric. Ryan noticed it, but said nothing. Daniel noticed it as well and quietly wondered what important event had been interrupted by an ordinary roadside stop. Another minute passed. Then another. Nobody spoke. The conversations at nearby fuel pumps had stopped entirely. Several travelers stood beside their vehicles, watching without recording, sensing that whatever happened next deserved attention rather than entertainment. A flock of birds crossed the orange sky above the interstate, their shadows gliding across the pavement before vanishing into the trees beyond the rest area. Marcus slowly closed his eyes for a single breath and opened them again. His expression never changed. Somewhere far in the distance, barely noticeable beneath the steady flow of highway traffic, a low mechanical hum began to emerge from the western horizon. Daniel lifted his head first, listening carefully. Ryan heard it a moment later and instinctively looked toward the sky. Marcus did not move at all. It was almost as though he had been expecting that sound long before anyone else recognized it. The distant hum grew steadily louder until everyone in the parking lot instinctively turned toward the western sky. It was not the frantic sound of an emergency response. It was controlled, measured, and deliberate. Two dark military helicopters appeared above the tree line, flying in precise formation before gradually reducing speed as they approached the open field beyond the travel plaza. At nearly the same moment, a convoy of black government sport utility vehicles entered from the interstate exit, their headlights cutting through the warm evening glow without sirens or unnecessary urgency. Every vehicle moved with remarkable discipline, stopping in perfect alignment near the edge of the parking lot. Ryan Callahan felt his pulse quicken. This was no ordinary response. Men and women in neatly pressed military uniforms stepped out with quiet efficiency. There was no shouting, no confusion, and no dramatic display of authority. One senior officer, a silver-haired major general whose uniform displayed decades of distinguished service, walked calmly toward Marcus Ellison. The conversations around the fuel pumps vanished completely. Even the engines idling nearby seemed strangely muted beneath the weight of the moment. Daniel Brooks unconsciously straightened his own posture as the major general approached. When he stopped only a few feet from Marcus, he placed one hand sharply at the brim of his service cap and delivered a flawless salute. "Good evening, General Ellison," he said with unmistakable respect. "The Pentagon confirmed your report. We apologize for the delay." Marcus immediately returned the salute with equal precision. "Thank you for coming, General Hayes." The exchange lasted only seconds, yet it transformed the entire scene. Ryan stood motionless. His eyes shifted from Marcus to the stars decorating the Major General's shoulders and then back again, as though his mind refused to accept what was unfolding before him. Daniel slowly exhaled, finally understanding why the older man's quiet confidence had never wavered. The little boy standing beside his father whispered, almost afraid to break the silence, "He really is a general." His father nodded without taking his eyes off Marcus. "Yes," he answered softly, "and he never needed to prove it." General Hayes turned toward Ryan with a calm, professional expression. "Officer, thank you for remaining at the scene. We have already verified General Ellison's identity through secure military channels. He is expected at the Pentagon this evening for a classified leadership briefing. Ryan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He replayed every assumption he had made, every skeptical smile, every dismissive remark. None of them could be taken back. General Hayes continued in the same measured tone. General Ellison requested that everyone remain respectful and allow the facts to speak for themselves. We appreciate that no unnecessary escalation occurred. Daniel glanced toward Marcus, surprised that even now the older officer had chosen language that protected the dignity of everyone involved rather than emphasizing his own. Marcus looked briefly toward Ryan before speaking for the first time since the convoy arrived. "Officer Callahan, thank you for allowing me to make that phone call." There was no sarcasm in his voice, no victory, only quiet sincerity. That unexpected kindness struck Ryan more deeply than any criticism could have. Around them, the golden sunlight reflected across polished military vehicles. The American flag continued to wave above the travel plaza, and every person watching realized they had just witnessed something far greater than the confirmation of a title. They had witnessed the quiet strength of a man whose character had spoken long before anyone recognized his rank. Ryan Callahan stood frozen as the last pieces of certainty quietly slipped away. The evening light reflected across the polished hood of his patrol cruiser, but he barely noticed it. His attention remained fixed on General Marcus Ellison, the same man he had doubted only minutes earlier, who now stood surrounded by officers whose respect required no explanation. General Hayes accepted a secure folder from one of his aides before turning back toward Marcus. "The secretary asked me to ensure you arrive on schedule, sir. The briefing has been delayed until your arrival." Marcus gave a polite nod. "Thank you. I regret that everyone has been inconvenienced." The word surprised nearly everyone listening. He apologized for the delay instead of mentioning the misunderstanding that had caused it. Daniel Brooks lowered his eyes for a brief moment, quietly reflecting on the difference between authority and leadership. Ryan finally stepped forward, his expression no longer guarded but deeply unsettled. He carefully removed Marcus's driver's license from his shirt pocket and held it out with both hands. "General Ellison," he said softly, "this belongs to you." Marcus accepted it with the same calm courtesy he had shown from the beginning. Neither man spoke for several seconds. The breeze carried the distant sound of truck tires rolling across the interstate, while the first evening lights flickered on beneath the travel plaza canopy. Ryan drew a slow breath. "I owe you an apology." His voice was steady, but every word carried genuine weight. "I made assumptions before I understood who you were." Marcus looked at him thoughtfully before answering. "Officer, every person deserves to be understood before they are judged. That is true whether they wear a uniform, a business suit, or work boots." Ryan lowered his head slightly. "You are right." General Hayes remained silent, allowing the conversation to unfold without interruption. Several military personnel standing nearby exchanged quiet glances, expecting Marcus to request a formal complaint or disciplinary action. Instead, Marcus folded his driver's license into his wallet and slipped it into his jacket. "General Hayes," he said, "I have one request." "Anything, sir." Marcus looked briefly toward Ryan before continuing. "No punishment based on today's misunderstanding. I would rather see this become an opportunity to learn than a reason to blame." Ryan slowly looked up, surprised by what he had just heard. Marcus continued with the same quiet sincerity. "Public service carries tremendous responsibility. Every encounter shapes how people see justice. We all have moments that test our judgment. What matters is what we choose to learn afterward." Daniel felt those words settle over the parking lot more deeply than any official order could have. Even the travelers who had remained to watch seemed to understand that something much greater than an ordinary roadside stop had taken place. Ryan swallowed hard before speaking again. "I cannot change what happened today." Marcus answered gently. "None of us can change yesterday. We can only decide whether tomorrow looks different." The little boy who had quietly observed everything stepped away from his father and offered Marcus a shy smile. Marcus smiled back and nodded warmly. The child instinctively stood a little straighter, as though he had just met the kind of hero history books rarely described completely. Around them, the fading sunlight bathed the parking lot in soft gold, reflecting from polished military vehicles, weathered concrete, and the quietly waving American flag above them all. In that peaceful light, titles mattered less than character, And the strongest lesson anyone carried home that evening was not about rank, power, or prestige, but about the quiet dignity of treating every human being with the respect they deserve before knowing anything else about them. General Hayes opened the rear door of the lead government sport utility vehicle, but Marcus Ellison did not step inside immediately. Instead, he turned one last time toward the small gathering of travelers whose ordinary afternoon had quietly become something they would remember for years. The golden light of sunset stretched across the parking lot, casting long shadows beneath the rows of vehicles as a cool evening breeze carried the scent of pine through the air. Marcus walked toward the little boy who had watched the entire encounter with wide, thoughtful eyes. The child stood silently beside his father, uncertain whether to speak. Marcus smiled warmly and extended his hand. The boy shook it with both of his own. "Young man," Marcus said gently, "never let someone else's opinion decide your worth. Your character will always travel farther than your name." The boy nodded with a seriousness far beyond his years. "Yes, sir." Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his windbreaker and removed a small challenge coin bearing the seal of the United States Army. Years of careful handling had polished its edges until they reflected the fading sunlight. He placed it carefully into the child's hand. "Keep this," he said, "not because it came from a general, but because I hope it reminds you to become someone others can trust." The boy stared at the coin as though it were the greatest treasure he had ever received. His father quietly thanked Marcus, emotion visible in his eyes. Nearby, Daniel Brooks stepped forward and extended his hand. Marcus accepted it immediately. "Thank you for reminding me what leadership looks like," Daniel said sincerely. Marcus smiled. "Leadership begins with listening before deciding." Daniel gave a quiet nod, knowing those words would remain with him long after the evening ended. Ryan Callahan remained several feet away, watching in silence. Marcus approached him one final time. Neither man spoke for several seconds. The helicopters continued idling in the distance, while the American flag moved gently above them against a sky now painted in deep orange and soft blue. Ryan finally broke the silence. "General Ellison, I will remember today for the rest of my career." Marcus answered with quiet kindness. "I hope you remember the people you meet tomorrow even more." Ryan slowly nodded. "I will." Marcus offered a firm handshake. There was no resentment between them, only the quiet understanding that difficult moments sometimes become the beginning of better ones. As Marcus turned toward the waiting vehicle, every soldier standing nearby instinctively came to attention. General Hayes offered another crisp salute, and Marcus returned it before stepping inside. The convoy pulled smoothly onto the interstate without flashing lights or unnecessary spectacle, disappearing into the evening traffic as naturally as it had arrived. The helicopters gradually lifted into the darkening sky, their distant sound fading beyond the horizon until only the quiet hum of passing cars remained. Ryan stood alone beside his patrol cruiser for a long moment, looking up at the flag still moving gently above the travel plaza. He no longer saw an interrupted traffic stop. He saw a lesson that no academy, no handbook, and no promotion could ever fully teach. Respect was never something reserved for titles, uniforms, or appearances. It was something every person deserved before a single assumption was made. As darkness settled over the highway, the parking lot slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm. But for everyone who had witnessed that evening, ordinary would never quite feel the same again.